It began with a silence that didn't belong in MotoGP. Not the silence of victory, nor the one that follows a crash, but something heavier. When Marc Marquez's absence turned Ducati's garage into a cathedral of uncertainty, a question started echoing through the paddock. What happens when a heartbeat of chaos stops? Into that silence stepped Nicolo Bulega, a rookie with a calm face and eyes that looked too young to carry the ghost of a legend. But beneath that calm lived a storm no telemetry could record. The engineers saw numbers. Bulega felt shadows. The GP25, built around Marquez's raw aggression and unpredictable rhythm, behaved like an untamed organism. Every corner whispered a different language, every lap a test of trust between man and machine. In 2025, MotoGP is no longer just about speed. It's about decoding emotion through algorithms, learning how fear translates into throttle precision, how instinct becomes data. And Bulega stands at that fragile frontier where psychology meets engineering. He doesn't fight the bike. He listens to it breathe. Somewhere inside those 300 kilometers per hour straights, between the scream of carbon and the hum of electronics, lies the truth no one in Ducati dares to say out loud. The world wants to know if he can replace Marquez. But the real question, the one that keeps everyone awake at night, is darker. Can anyone survive the machine that Marquez left behind? When Marc Marquez was forced to step aside after his latest injury, the heartbeat of Ducati seemed to fade beneath the fluorescent hum of the garage lights. The GP25, a living machine sculpted around his violent elegance, waited in silence for new hands to give it purpose. Those hands belonged to Nicolo Bulega, a rider whose fire had been tempered in the forge of Superbike, but who now stood at the threshold of something colder, sharper, and mercilessly precise. The first time he sat on Marquez's bike, the aluminum frame felt heavier than its weight. It carried memory, not just mechanics. Around him, the engineers whispered as if afraid to disturb a ghost that still lingered in every carbon fiber. "I'm having a bit of difficulty under braking," he confessed, voice flat, eyes studying the telemetry that blinked like an unfamiliar language. "With the Pirellis, you can be aggressive and stop the bike straight away. With these Michelins, you can't be aggressive in the first part of braking. You have to brake later." Each word revealed a man translating himself, sentence by sentence, from instinct into calculation. The GP25's front-end geometry, revised with a new adaptive torsion sensor, demanded sensitivity that could not be forced. Maybe this bike doesn't want to be dominated, he thought. Maybe it wants to be understood. Outside, the track shimmered like molten glass, and he felt the pressure of millions compressed into one heartbeat. Ducati's legacy pulsed beneath him, impatient, expectant, almost alive. The mechanics adjusted the rear preload by half a turn, as if easing the weight of a legend. Every click of the wrench sounded like a countdown. Bulega inhaled the metallic scent of fuel and sweat, trying to convince himself that fear was only data written in another form. His gloves creaked as he tightened his grip. The visor came down, cutting him off from doubt. The moment the engine roared, the walls trembled as though the spirit of Marquez had awakened to watch. For an instant, Bulega saw not a replacement, but a reflection. The light turned green. The shadow of a legend stretched ahead of him, infinite and unforgiving, and he opened the throttle. Portimão greeted Nicolo Bulega not with applause, but with intimidation. The circuit, carved into the hills of the Algarve, looked more like a storm frozen in asphalt than a racetrack, its blind crests and plunging corners waiting to swallow any trace of hesitation. Under the merciless sun, the tarmac shimmered like molten steel, promising both speed and punishment. The first practice lap was a ritual of uncertainty. The GP25 bucked and pulsed beneath him, each gear shift like a heartbeat out of sync. Former world champion Neil Hodgson captured it best on TNT Sports. "It's here that MotoGP gets really hard. You put on a soft Michelin, you find a second, and somehow you stay on two wheels. It's the magic these guys know by instinct." And for Bulega, it's still a journey of discovery. Those words hung in the air as Bulega fought to tame the Ducati's violent rhythm, realizing that Portimão wasn't a track, it was a truth serum. The bike's inertial management system, fine-tuned for Marquez's chaos, reacted like an untamed pulse, correcting and resisting in equal measure. "I have to stop fighting it," he thought. "I have to listen to what it wants." At 350 kilometers per hour, the front wheel skimmed over the crest of Turn 9, his vision shaking in the wind like a film reel on fire. The Michelin front gripped, then slid, then gripped again, testing his trust. His senses stretched thin, smell of hot brakes, vibration through bone, the metallic scream of a motor that demanded surrender, not control. Engineers later said the corner sensors showed variations within 0.002 of a second, tiny mistakes that separated brilliance from catastrophe. But in that chaos, Bulega found rhythm. The descent into turn 12 felt like diving into light, his body flowing with the machine instead of against it. It's not about bravery, he told himself. It's about faith in motion. We crossed the line, sweat burning behind his eyes. The timer flashed a lap that silenced the paddock. He hadn't conquered Portimão, he had survived it. And in MotoGP, survival is always the first sign of belonging. Inside the Ducati hospitality unit, the hum of air conditioning couldn't hide the tension that hung like static before a storm. Davide Tardozzi studied his new rider with the patience of a man who had seen too many prodigies collapse under the weight of their own brilliance. His voice, when it came, was low, almost paternal. Don't do anything silly. You don't have to go beyond your limit. You don't yet know how this bike will react. It wasn't an order. It was a survival code. The GP25 was a paradox, mechanically perfect, emotionally volatile, its balance razor-thin and tuned to Marquez's instincts. Bulega nodded, but his eyes betrayed the fire that no advice could extinguish. How can I find my limit if I never touch it? He thought, fingers brushing the carbon fairing as if it could answer back. When the engine started, its vibration climbed through his spine like a challenge. Every click of the gearbox was an argument with himself. Control versus desire, restraint versus hunger. On track, the Ducati's new electronic throttle mapping system demanded surgical precision. Even a 2-degree twist too early could send him sideways. He felt the Michelin front dance, light and nervous, as if warning him that this bike respected only chaos. The first lap was clean, the second faster, the third electric. He was riding beyond the line that separates caution from instinct, and the GP25 responded, alive under him, predatory and eager. The telemetry would later show micro-oscillations in his steering head, tiny flickers invisible to the human eye, proof of how close he had come to disaster. In the pit wall, Tardozzi exhaled, muttering a silent prayer that the boy would listen. Not yet, Bulega whispered inside his helmet. I can still give her more. But in that whisper was the essence of every racer who ever lived, defiance wrapped in devotion. The front tire protested through turn 5, twitching, gripping, letting go, and catching again like a heartbeat on the edge of failure. It crossed the line half a second quicker, the lap of confession written in adrenaline. When he returned, sweat traced rivers through the dust on his face, and Tardozzi met his gaze without a word. The silence between them said everything. Orders are meant to be heard, but instincts are meant to be obeyed. It happened in an instant, the kind of moment that erases thought and leaves only instinct. Lap 4 of the sprint race, the air thick with heat and noise, and Nicolo Bulega braked into turn 4 as he had done 100 times in his mind. But this time, the world broke loose. The front folded without warning, a mechanical betrayal too fast for reflexes to catch. Metal screamed. Gravel erupted. The GP25 spun away from him like a wild animal freed from control, scattering dust and disbelief. Silence fell, heavy and surgical. Later, when the adrenaline had thinned and the cameras had closed in, Bulega's voice was steady but raw. I braked too hard and lost the front while I was completely straight. It's the most difficult thing for me right now, because the braking style in MotoGP is the exact opposite of Superbike. The quote ran through the paddock like a diagnosis. Ducati's engineers huddled around the telemetry screens, eyes tracking the data curve. 142 bar of braking pressure, lean angle near zero, front load transfer too abrupt. The new adaptive suspension valve, a component designed for smoother transitions, had registered a spike just before the fall, proof that theory and reality had collided head-on. I thought I understood her, Bulega admitted to himself in the medical center, staring at his torn gloves. But maybe she's still teaching me how to listen. The pain in his wrist pulsed with every heartbeat, not sharp but dull, like guilt. Outside, the smell of burnt rubber clung to the wind. The GP25 was wheeled back into the box, its left side shredded, silent now, but still radiating defiance. For Ducati, the crash wasn't just a mistake. It was a message written in telemetry ink. MotoGP demands precision, not passion. Yet passion was all Bulega had ever known. The crew chief looked over at the boy they pinned their hopes on, and for a moment, the numbers didn't matter. Every legend starts with a scar. The cameras caught his slow walk back to the paddock, dust still clinging to his leathers, and the crowd saw not failure, but awakening. On that day, theory met trauma, and both learned how easily truth can bleed. When Nicolo Bulega walked back into the garage, the sound of the pit lane seemed to fade into a distant hum. The Ducati mechanics turned toward him, waiting not for excuses but for understanding. His leathers were dusted with gravel, his gloves still trembling slightly from the impact. The GP25 stood in the corner, its left fairing cracked, like a wounded creature that refused to bow. Bulega removed his helmet slowly, exhaling the silence that follows every fall. "It was my first lap with a hard front," he said, voice steady but stripped of pride. "I overtook a few riders and tried to catch Morbidelli, but I pushed too much. I have to change my riding style, but after 2 years in Superbike, it's not easy to do it in one day." Around him, engineers scribbled notes, but no one interrupted. The smell of hot carbon and fuel filled the room. Ducati's data showed a micro delay of 0.03 seconds in brake modulation, the difference between control and chaos. He listened as the telemetry was explained, yet the numbers felt secondary to what he already knew. "Not at the moment, because I have too many things to think about." You really enjoy riding a bike only when you can ride free, with your natural style. Now instead I'm too focused on what I have to do. His honesty landed heavier than the crash itself. Maybe that's the real limit, he thought, when fear hides behind focus. Outside, the air buzzed with speculation, but inside the box there was only reflection. The Ducati's dashboard still flickered faintly, displaying the ghost of a lap that could have been. In the background, the mechanic adjusted the chain tension by a single link, as if repairing something unseen. Bulega sat on the pit wall, his eyes fixed on the empty track, the asphalt glimmering like an unanswered question. Every great rider faces that moment when pride fractures into learning. His came early, sharp, and necessary. The GP25 was no longer just a machine. It was a mirror. In its reflection, he didn't see failure. He saw transformation beginning quietly, like a wound deciding to heal. In the shadow of Marquez's absence, Ducati's empire trembled, not from lack of horsepower, but from uncertainty. As Nicolo Bulega began to adapt, Francesco Bagnaia, the reigning champion, felt the ground shift beneath him. His smooth precision, once the gold standard, was being rewritten by a machine that refused to be predictable. "I was lacking speed right from the start," Bagnaia admitted, his tone caught between control and confession. "I wasn't able to make the most of the grip and lacked acceleration out of the corners. I also used up the rear tire a lot. At the end, I was struggling so much that I was overtaken on the line. For a moment, the numbers no longer obeyed logic." Ducati's engineers whispered about asymmetrical tire wear, about the new hybrid torque mapping 4.2 that favored abrupt transitions over Bagnaia's fluid style. The GP25, tuned for Marquez's instinctive aggression, punished harmony and rewarded chaos. "We lost FP2 this morning sorting out the setup. The grip wasn't fantastic, but we're trying to improve. I think tomorrow we can make a step forward," he said later, forcing calm through clenched teeth. But the telemetry told another story, rear traction dropping by 4% per lap, corner exit instability rising with each turn. In the box next door, Bulega observed in silence, watching the master wrestle with a machine that refused to obey the old rules. "I want to understand the bike lap after lap," he confessed later. "Right now, I feel like a passenger, unable to push as I'd like because I still have so much to learn." His humility contrasted sharply with Bagnaia's frustration. Maybe that's the difference, Bulega thought. He's trying to control it. I'm trying to listen. The GP25 became a mirror reflecting Ducati's identity crisis, a brand split between instinct and order, genius and geometry. Every revolution of its Desmosedici heart seemed to whisper that the Marquez era had changed the laws of riding itself. The harsh truth wasn't about replacing a legend, it was about surviving in the world he'd rewritten. In that realization, Ducati's future revealed itself not in dominance, but in adaptation. And under the bright lights of the paddock, both men, one champion, one apprentice, understood the same painful lesson. When a bike is born from chaos, only those who can dance with it will endure. Night falls over Portimão, and the paddock finally exhales. The engines have gone silent, but their echoes linger in the air like ghosts unwilling to leave. Inside the Ducati garage, cables still hum, screens still glow, and somewhere between the scent of oil and exhaustion, Nicolo Bulega sits alone with his thoughts. The rookie who arrived as a question mark now carries the weight of an answer he never sought. Around him, the GP25 rests under its red cover, part machine, part memory. Maybe legends don't disappear, he thinks. They just change shape. Outside, reporters dissect lap times and strategy, unaware of the private storm that brews inside a rider learning to coexist with destiny. Ducati engineers whisper about tire pressures, torque sensors, and the delicate balance of heat and grip, but what truly burns is unseen, the collision between legacy and self-belief. Marquez's shadow is still there, stretched across the floor like a scar that refuses to fade, yet it no longer frightens him. It's not about replacing anyone, Bulega murmurs, tracing a finger across the Ducati emblem. It's about becoming someone worth following. The metaphor feels heavy, like light trying to push through metal. The world outside is moving again, faster, louder, ready for the next race. But inside this quiet box, something irreversible has shifted. The apprentice has stepped beyond imitation. The myth has become a mirror, and the silence that once symbolized loss now feels like beginning. Because in MotoGP, glory doesn't roar, it echoes. And tonight, that echo carries Bulega's name.